To the world, he was just my father. To me, he was my first hero, my forever safe place. Until I found out what he did to my sister. But then, I gave him the kind of justice no court could ever deliver. To the world, he was just my father. To me, he was my first hero, my forever safe place. I used to think monsters lived under beds. My dad taught me that wasn't true. Monsters, he'd say, were afraid of him. I believed him. I believed everything he said. Growing up, I was the kind of daughter who watched her father's every move like it was gospel. His voice calmed my storms. His hands, always rough from hard work, were the hands I'd run into when I scraped my knee or had a nightmare. He wasn't just a provider, he was the protector. That man could walk into a room and silence chaos with just a look. My mother, she disappeared into shadows long ago, mentally, emotionally, and then finally, physically. She left one day and never came back. Dad told me she was weak, that she abandoned us. I believed him. Because he raised us, me and my little sister, Alina, all alone. Alina was 5 years younger than me. Quiet, timid, but full of light when she laughed. I became her mother by default. I brushed her hair, helped with her homework, sang her lullabies. But he was the anchor we both held on to. Or so I thought. He made her laugh in ways I couldn't. When she cried, she didn't come to me. She went to him. Daddy makes the monsters go away, she'd whisper. Now I wish I had asked her what kind of monster she meant. Back then, I didn't notice the things I now wish I had. The long silences after she returned from his study. The way she clung to me some nights like she was afraid to sleep. The fear in her eyes when he walked into the room. I dismissed it all as imagination. Stress. Trauma from our mother leaving. She never said anything. I never asked. Because I never imagined that my hero was the monster. Years passed like fragile glass cracking under pressure. Alina became quieter, colder. She stopped smiling. She wore long sleeves even in the summer. I chalked it up to teenage angst. Until I walked in on her one day, holding a bottle of sleeping pills, shaking, whispering, I can't live with what he did to me anymore. My world shattered. I dropped everything. I grabbed her shoulders and screamed, begged her to tell me what she meant. Her eyes. God, I'll never forget the look in them. Like she was already halfway gone. And then she said the words that turned my blood to ice. He touches me when you're not around. I couldn't breathe. My mind refused to believe it. My father? My father? The man who taught me how to ride a bike, who kissed our foreheads goodnight, who told us bedtime stories when we were too scared to sleep. No, 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 no. But the bruises were there. The memories poured out of her like poison, years of abuse, of threats, of manipulation. How he told her no one would believe her. How he'd say it was her fault. That she made him do it. I fell to my knees that night and screamed until I couldn't scream anymore. And then, I got up. Because if the world saw father, I would show them the monster hiding beneath that skin. If the court wouldn't deliver justice, I would. After that night, I never looked at him the same again. He came home whistling like nothing had happened. Set his keys down. Opened the fridge. Asked what we wanted for dinner. The kind of normal that makes your skin crawl once you know the truth. I watched him like a stranger. Every movement, every breath. It made me sick. Alina didn't come out of her room. She refused to look at him, refused to eat, refused to speak. He barely noticed. He laughed it off, said she was being a typical moody teenager. He had no idea that I knew. That she had finally broken the silence. That his carefully constructed lies were rotting from the inside. I wanted to scream at him. Break a plate. Wrap my hands around his throat and demand to know how he could do it. But I didn't. Because rage is loud, but revenge is patient. Instead, I started watching. Listening. Learning. I went through his phone when he slept. Dug through drawers, searched files, found journals, recordings. The more I found, the more I drowned in the darkness of what he'd done. He wasn't just a monster. He was methodical, calculated. Sick. He kept trophies, photos, clothes, notes. I found them buried in a locked box behind the insulation in the basement wall. My hands trembled as I held a small silver bracelet, Alina's. The one she thought she lost when she was 10. That was the first time I threw up from grief. I wanted to go to the police, but Alina begged me not to. He said if I ever spoke, he'd hurt you too. Her voice was so fragile, I could barely recognize it. I tried to hug her. She flinched. That moment broke something in me. She didn't just need protection. She needed justice. But more than that, she needed to be free from the nightmare he had trapped her in. And the truth was, the system doesn't always save people like her. I knew how this would go. They'd ask for evidence, testimony, timelines. They'd twist her pain into a puzzle and make her prove it mattered. I wasn't going to let that happen. So I made a choice. He destroyed my sister's life in silence. I would end his in plain sight. I began documenting everything, every file, every timestamp, every lie. I recorded his schedule, his movements, who he talked to, where he went. I kept a diary. Not for the police, but for me. For what I was going to do. I'd be lying if I said it didn't terrify me. Some nights I sat on the floor outside Alina's room, watching her sleep, wondering how I was going to pull this off. Wondering if I'd ever be able to live with what I was planning. But then I'd hear her whimper in her sleep. And I knew. Living with the plan would be easier than living with the memory of what he did. I didn't want to kill him. Not at first. It would have been too easy, too merciful. A single moment of pain wouldn't be enough to balance the years of torment he carved into Alina's soul. Monsters like him don't deserve to disappear. They deserve to rot. So, I decided I wouldn't just destroy him. I would unmake him, piece by piece. Slowly. Quietly. So when the world finally saw the truth, it wouldn't just be a scandal. It would be a legacy-shattering collapse. The first step, isolation. He thrived in admiration, friends, neighbors, coworkers. Everyone thought he was a great single dad. I started small, anonymous notes to his employer, vague but enough to trigger HR. Whispered concerns at the church. Social media comments on old pictures with Alina. Nothing direct, nothing provable. Just seeds of doubt. And he started noticing. Someone's spreading rumors about me, he told me one night, pacing in the kitchen. Coworkers are acting strange. I think someone's trying to smear me. I shrugged. Maybe you pissed someone off. He studied me, trying to read my face. For the first time, I didn't look away. I was done being afraid of him. But he wasn't done pretending. Where's Alina? He asked. She hasn't come out all day. She's not feeling well, I lied. He started to move toward her room. I stepped in front of him. Let her rest. He stared at me. His eyes weren't angry. They were calculating. Like he suddenly realized I wasn't the little girl who worshipped him anymore. I held his gaze, heart pounding. He backed off. That night, I called in a favor. A friend of mine worked in cybersecurity. I fed him a story, said I suspected my father was hiding things on his devices. He helped me access his laptop. Emails. Encrypted folders. What we found made me cold inside. There were videos. Audio recordings. Digital journals where he detailed sessions with Alina, dates, emotions, strategies to keep her silent. He wrote like a scientist dissecting an experiment. No remorse. Just obsession. I cried until my throat ached. Then I backed it all up. Multiple drives. Multiple copies. Hidden in places he'd never find. One in a safety deposit box. One with a lawyer friend. One in my closet, behind a false panel I built myself. Insurance. Because once I started phase 2, there was no going back. Phase 2. Exposure in the dark. I created a burner account. No name. No face. Just a shadow online with a simple mission: expose his sins. Each week, I leak something small: a screenshot, a journal entry, a time-stamped photo. Nothing illegal, yet. Just enough to feed curiosity and raise questions. And always posted on platforms where people who knew him would see. Tagged with vague captions. Your favorite hero dad sure has interesting secrets. Ask him about his real bedtime stories. The truth always finds its way out. He started unraveling. He accused me, Alina, the neighbors, his coworkers, said people were out to get him. He'd scream in the living room, throwing things, demanding to know who was doing this to him. But he never once said it wasn't true. Because even monsters know the truth can't be denied forever. One day, I walked into the house and found Alina sitting on the porch steps. She looked up at me, her eyes red but determined. I want to help. I froze. Are you sure? She nodded. If you're going to destroy him, I want to be part of it. I wrapped my arms around her and whispered, then we're going to end him. Together. He stopped smiling in public. That's how I knew the mask was slipping. At first, people whispered behind his back, coworkers, neighbors, even our church pastor. You could see it in their eyes. That strange mix of disbelief and suspicion. Like they wanted it not to be true, but they couldn't unknow what they'd read, what they'd seen. I had made sure of that. He lost his job first. They called it downsizing, but we knew better. His hands shook when he read the email. His knuckles white, his jaw locked in silent rage. He didn't even look at me. He just stood up and left the house. He didn't come home that night. Alina and I sat in silence. Neither of us said it out loud, but we both wondered if this was the night he'd snap. If he'd come back and do something irreversible. But when he finally walked in the next morning, all he did was drop his keys on the counter and mutter, "They're going to pay." That's when I knew the monster was still alive in him. Still deluded. Still dangerous. So I tightened the grip. The poison of truth. The next leak was louder. An audio clip, his voice, unmistakably him, reading from his digital journal. Describing Alina like an object. Like a project. Every word burned like acid, but it had to be heard. It had to be known. The clip went viral in our community. Suddenly, his name wasn't met with admiration, it was met with tension. Whispers turned into avoidance. The church stopped calling. His friends stopped visiting. Even the neighbors, who once called him the best single dad on the block, started crossing the street to avoid him. Still, he didn't stop denying it. He told anyone who would listen that it was all fake. That someone had edited his voice. That we were being manipulated. That I was unstable and Alina was disturbed. But now, people were listening to us. Because for the first time, his lies weren't louder than our silence. The trap tightens. One evening, he cornered me in the kitchen. "You think I don't know what you're doing?" he growled. His voice was low, dangerous. "You think you're smarter than me?" I didn't flinch. "No. I know I am." He slapped the counter, inches from my hand. "You're going to ruin everything." I looked him straight in the eye. "You already did." He stared at me for a long time, breathing heavy. His eyes bloodshot and hollow. And for the first time, he looked afraid. Not of being exposed, but of being powerless. The final trigger. It was Alina who gave me the last piece we needed. She handed me a journal she had written in secret. Not the one he forced her to keep. One she wrote for herself. It detailed everything, dates, descriptions, memories too sharp to be imagination. She had even hidden the camera once. There was video. God, there was video. I wanted to scream when I watched it. I wanted to rip the screen from the wall and set fire to everything he ever touched. But I didn't. Instead, I backed it up, just like everything else. And then, I made the final move. I sent a copy anonymously to our town's local news tip line. I knew they couldn't legally publish it yet, but it would be enough to get things moving. Enough to start an official investigation. Enough to force eyes where there had only been shadows. But most of all, I made sure he knew it was coming. I left a note on his desk. You called her a secret. I made her a headline. Sleep tight. The first headline dropped on a Tuesday morning. Community father under scrutiny after shocking anonymous evidence surfaces. They didn't name him yet, but the details were enough for anyone who knew our family to connect the dots. The whispers turned into sharp, public questions. The anonymous posts I'd been sharing for months suddenly made sense to people. This time, they couldn't pretend it was a misunderstanding. This time, there were receipts. The article referenced files handed over to authorities, emails, journal entries, audio clips. The station claimed they were cooperating with local police for verification. He read it over his coffee. The mug trembled in his hand, but he tried to act calm. He glanced at me, cold, accusing, but didn't say a word. I didn't offer one either. He spent the rest of the day locked in his study, probably trying to erase everything. But I had already mirrored every file he had. He was scrubbing ashes from a house that was already burned down. That night, a police car passed our street. He didn't sleep. The man behind the mask. It's strange how fast people change once their image cracks. The same neighbors who used to ask him to fix their fences now avoided eye contact. The same families that once invited him to birthday parties crossed the street to keep their children away. He still hadn't been arrested. But in a town like ours, silence spreads like wildfire. And guilt smells long before it's confirmed. He started talking to himself at night, muttering in circles, blaming ghosts, blaming the girls, blaming me, blaming the internet. Never once did he whisper the word guilt. Monsters never think they're monsters. They think they're victims of a world that won't understand their twisted version of love. One night, he tried to confront Alina. She was standing in the hallway, frozen, her body tense like a deer before the strike. I heard him say, "Tell them the truth. Tell them you made it up." Before she could answer, I stepped between them. "She doesn't owe you anything." He narrowed his eyes. "You're ruining this family." I smiled, just slightly. "No. You already did. I'm just making sure no one forgets." He raised his hand, but he didn't strike me. He just stood there, fingers trembling in the air, his power unraveling in front of the very daughters he once ruled like a god. Then, slowly, he lowered his hand and walked away. That was the night I knew he was breaking. Not because of fear, but because the world was finally seeing him. The call that shattered his silence. A week later, it came. The police arrived. 2 officers. Calm, deliberate. They had a warrant, courtesy of the evidence I had anonymously delivered in waves. They asked him to come with them. He didn't scream. He didn't protest. He just looked at me, eyes sunken, lips trembling. "You did this," he said softly. I didn't answer, because he wasn't asking. He knew. They took his computer, his journals, his hard drives, everything he'd hidden in the shadows. And for the first time since I was a child, the house felt clean, lighter, as if his presence had always been a poison in the walls. Justice in their language, but not in mine. They kept him overnight. Then they let him go. Pending investigation, they said. Not enough to hold him yet. I watched from the window as he came home. No handcuffs. No shame. Just a man who had committed unspeakable crimes and was still breathing the same air as us. Alina broke down. "He's back." "Why is he back?" I held her tight. Rage and helplessness clawed at my ribs like wild animals. Because I realized something bitter. The system wasn't built for girls like us. It was built to protect reputations, not wounds. But I wasn't finished. If justice wouldn't hold him, I would. The night after they let him go, I stood by Alina's bedroom door and watched her sleep. Even in rest, she flinched. Her hands clutched the blanket like she was still trying to protect herself from what had already happened, from what might happen again. I pressed my forehead against the wall and made a silent promise. You'll never be afraid in this house again. Not while I breathe. I had played the legal game. I had handed over every piece of evidence. I had followed the rules, hoping the world would see what I saw. But the world moved slowly, and girls like us didn't have time to wait. So I changed the rules. The strategy of silence. I stopped leaking evidence. I stopped talking online. People assumed I had been silenced. But in reality, I was just watching, waiting, gathering. Because now, it wasn't about proving what he did. It was about making him feel it. The shame, the fear, the weight of every breath. Not the kind of fear that comes in a courtroom, but the kind that follows you into dreams. That's the kind of justice he never imagined I'd grow strong enough to serve. The ghost of the daughter he failed. It started small. He'd leave a room and come back to find things moved, subtle, just enough to make him question himself. His razor turned facing the wrong direction. His favorite tie cut in half, neatly folded in his drawer. His study door, once locked, slightly ajar. And then came the notes. Tiny, handwritten lines. Folded neatly. Left in places only he would find. She remembers everything. Your mask is cracking. Even the dark has eyes now. We're still here. His face grew pale. His hands twitched. The circles under his eyes darkened with every sleepless night. He was being haunted, not by ghosts, but by the daughters he failed to break. The house of mirrors. I installed hidden cameras, real ones this time. In his bedroom. In the study. Even in the basement where he'd once kept his sick little secrets. Not for evidence this time, but for control. I watched him unravel day by day. He'd talk to himself. Screamed at shadows. Punched walls like they owed him answers. He was living in a prison of my making, and I didn't even have to lock the door. And one night, when the silence grew too loud, he snapped. I watched on my screen as he tore open every drawer, every cabinet, searching for bugs. He screamed my name like a curse. Like a prayer. Like someone who knew the world had flipped, and he wasn't in charge anymore. He didn't find anything, because everything he feared was already inside him. The Whisper campaign. I started showing up at places he tried to reclaim as safe. The grocery store. The library. Even the church he once led. Never said a word. Just stood in the distance. Watching. It drove him insane. Because no one believed him anymore when he said, "She's out to get me." They looked at him like he was the crazy one now. Like he was unraveling, and I was just a silent daughter, grieving. Poor man. Poor father. Haunted by his own guilt. If only they knew. He wasn't being haunted. He was being hunted. The final push. One morning, he packed a bag. He was planning to leave. I watched from the staircase, hidden in shadow, as he shoved clothes into a duffel and muttered something about getting out before they destroy me. He didn't see me standing there. Didn't see the flash drive I'd left in his coat pocket, labeled, "For her." I knew he'd find it. And when he did, he'd watch every second of what I compiled, every piece of evidence, every voice recording, every hidden camera angle. But most importantly, he'd hear her. Alina. Her voice. Her pain. Her truth. Because I recorded her reading her journal. Every word. Every night. Every secret she buried to protect the man who destroyed her. And now, he'd hear it in her own voice. Not in a courtroom, but alone with his guilt. And when he finished, the final message on the drive would be mine. You created this cage. I just gave you the mirror. Watch yourself rot. He disappeared the next morning. No note. No goodbye. Just an empty closet and a silence that lingered like smoke after fire. But I wasn't surprised. Cowards always run when the truth claws too close. What he didn't know, what he could never understand, was that I had anticipated this. Every step of his unraveling, every reaction, every escape route. Because monsters, no matter how cunning they think they are, always follow the same patterns. He went to the one place he thought I'd never find him, his childhood home. The house his father built in a remote village 2 hours from the city. A place untouched by the internet, where his sins hadn't yet arrived in whispers. But I was already there. Not physically, digitally, emotionally, strategically. I had sent the files to local news stations, to advocacy groups, to survivors' forums, to the village's own priest, whom he once confessed his pride to. By the time he arrived there, the home he ran to had already been poisoned by the truth. Even the shadows rejected him. A woman from the village called our landline, someone who had known him as a boy. Her voice was low, careful. "He's here," she said. "But no one wants him. They know." I didn't ask how. I didn't need to. Because truth doesn't need volume to spread. It just needs oxygen. And in that suffocating little village, my father, once seen as a prodigy, a role model, was now a curse. A name parents warned their daughters to avoid. A face people pretended not to see in the streets. He stayed inside. Hid from sunlight. From stares. And that's when I sent the final blow. The confession. I posted one last video. No names. No faces. Just my voice. Calm. Measured. Raw. He was my father. My protector. My home. And then he became my sister's nightmare. He buried her voice under layers of guilt, manipulation, and silence. But now, we are speaking. And we won't stop until every shadow he hides and remembers her pain. It went viral in under 24 hours. And though I didn't say his name, everyone knew. The village. The city. The family that had defended him. The men who once shook his hand in church pews. Even the judge who once called him a man of character. This wasn't evidence for court. This was justice of another kind. Reputation. Ruin. Reality. Alina's light. Alina watched the video with me, curled beside me like she used to when we were kids. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes that I thought had died long ago. Peace. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She just leaned on me, whispered, "He doesn't get to win," and let herself exhale, deep and free. And I knew then. I had already won. The letter he sent. A week passed. Then two. Then a letter arrived. No return address. No signature. But the handwriting was his. I knew it instantly. A part of me almost didn't want to read it. But I did. And it said, "You destroyed me. I was your father. I loved you. I don't know who I am anymore." Maybe I never did. There was no apology. No ownership. Just the final whimper of a man who thought love was control, who called silence protection, and who never expected his daughters to rise from the ashes he buried them in. I burned the letter. Watched the flames eat his last words like they meant nothing. Because they didn't. And then. Silence. I haven't heard from him since. Maybe he's still out there, living with the echo of our voices. Or maybe he finally realized that monsters don't get to walk away clean just because the world lets them. The law never caged him. But I did. With truth. With strategy. With a voice stronger than his fists ever were. Because justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes, she wears scars. And speaks with the calm of a daughter who refused to stay broken. He's gone now. Not dead, at least. Not in the way the world measures death. But gone in every way that matters. His name is a warning. His face, a disgrace. He no longer walks into rooms with pride, but with eyes lowered, shoulders bent under the weight of truth. Alina laughs again. Not every day, but sometimes. And when she does, I know he survived. We weren't just his daughters. We were his reckoning. They say justice is blind, but mine saw everything. It remembered every scream, every silence, every lie wrapped in love. And in the end, it didn't need a courtroom. It just needed two girls who refused to stay victims. Because heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes, they wear their father's shame like armor and turn it into a war he can never win.